Tuvalu is a small island nation located in the Pacific Ocean. Tuvalu is unique in that it is one of the smallest nations in the world, a cluster of islands with a total population of 10,500, spread out over about 10 square miles. On average, each person in Tuvalu emits about 1 ton of CO2 in emissions annually as compared to the US, which emits 16.21 tons per capita. Despite making up such a small percentage of the world's population, land area, and emissions, it is small island nations like Tuvalu that bear the brunt of environmental crises created by other nations. Tuvalu is the second lowest average elevation, behind the Maldives, at an astounding 15 feet above sea level. As a result, hurricanes and other disasters can result in incredible amounts of damage, such as 1972 Cyclone Bibi, which destroyed 90% of all structures in the nation. In 2015, Cyclone Pam wiped out 90% of the Tuvaluan crops, as well as most of their freshwater sources. As we see an increase in tropical storm frequency, it can be expected that Tuvalu will suffer greatly as a result. Climate change experts have predicted that the world would likely see a sea level rise of 8 to 16 inches in the next 100 years, and this would be catastrophic for island nations such as Tuvalu. This will leave a majority of the island nation uninhabitable and result in a much less accessible freshwater source. Climate change may seem like an issue which is still in the future, but this is not the case. If one looks closely, they can see the impacts taking shape. Already, there's been an increase in saltwater pooling on the land of Tuvalu. There are documented cases of saltwater bubbling up through the porous rock of the island during high tide, and these can be expected to expand as sea levels rise. In the last decade, the government of Tuvalu has been forced to dredge sand to fill in some of these saltwater pools, in order to protect the saltwater source of Tuvalu as well as prevent loss of land.
Climate change and rising sea levels are affecting larger island nations as well, such as my home, the Bahamas. Island nations heavily rely on coral reefs for protection from floods, hurricanes, and other natural disasters. Coral reefs surround our islands and serve as shock absorption from large waves. Scuba diving over the years has allowed me to see the degradation of our reefs in real time. The destruction of our coral reefs has worsened our hurricane seasons by increasing the intensity of hurricanes as seen by the most recent hurricane, Hurricane Dorian. Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas September 1st, 2019, and hovered over the Abacos for 3 days. Growing up witnessing hurricanes include watching them tear apart my neighborhood, dive into the bottom of the pool to retrieve the shingles torn from our roof, and the steady repair of the wall between my house and the neighbors that a tree tore down. Witnessing hurricanes now is hearing the cries of Bahamians as islands become flooded, hearing that my father's pediatric practice on another island was wiped out, hearing the cries of my people mourn the 70 Bahamians we lost to the hurricane, and the loudest of all, hearing the silence and the stillness of my country as we sit in shock, taking in what's left of our islands.
While the United States is one of the largest contributors to climate change, it does not suffer the full consequences of its actions. Many island nations and other small countries near the coast have the real fear of going underwater. It may not seem as severe or drastic in the United States, but climate change and rising sea levels have real implications in the United States as well. Hurricanes and other storms are happening more frequently and with greater intensity all around the world. Far too often, the outdated infrastructure implemented to protect cities from these events is not able to withstand the current storms. One example of this is Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, a Category 3 hurricane. It completely decimated the city because the infrastructure wasn't equipped to handle these powerful storms. The damage from Hurricane Katrina is still felt by the city of New Orleans, as repairs have cost over $125 billion and approximately 1,800 lives were lost. Not taking the levee into consideration, the stormwater system was not equipped to prevent nor subside the excessive flooding that was seen in the days after the hurricane. To make matters worse, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is the only federal program that recognizes future flood risk in its operations. As climate change progresses, it is almost certain that the frequency of hurricanes such as Hurricane Katrina will increase. We've already seen the damage of hurricanes such as Dorian, Irma, and Harvey. Hurricane Harvey set the new national record for highest recorded rainfall for cyclone storms, as well as causing tremendous flooding which resulted in about $125 billion worth of damage. And this is only the beginning. The 2021 hurricane season is expected to be as catastrophic as the 1933 hurricane season, the second most dangerous season ever recorded. It will likely feature 20 named storms, 11 hurricanes, and as many as 5 major landfalling hurricanes. In the near future, climate change is expected to result in melting polar ice caps. As soon as 2060, at least 10% of habitable land can be expected to frequently experience chronic flooding. Due to high population density along the coasts, 30% of all people could be displaced due to flooding by the 2060 deadline. This includes a total of 300,000 homes, with an approximate value of $117 billion. By 2100, these numbers could be up to 8 times higher.
Not only is the United States suffering damage from increased storms and flooding, but there are cities and states within the United States that will disappear and shrink due to the rising sea level. The state of Maryland, for example, estimates 1.4 feet of sea level rise by 2050 and 3.7 feet by 2100. Approximately 172,000 acres of land in Maryland are at or below elevations of 3.3 feet, which makes this area at risk of drastically shrinking within the next several decades. Some success was made during the Obama administration to reduce the impacts of rising sea levels and climate change. This was done by proposing new policies that created an extra margin of safety on new buildings and other infrastructures being built on or near floodplains. These measures, as well as the Paris Agreement and the Green Climate Fund, were quickly abrogated once the Trump administration took office. This can be a huge problem because there are no federal or state standards that specify the rate of sea level rise. As a global leader, the US will need to start taking charge of this issue if it wants to see any real change. The fight against the rising oceans isn't looming ahead of us anymore. The wave has reached shore, and the damage is only beginning to show. It's up to nations like the US to undo the damage they have wrought to save countries like Tuvalu and the Bahamas, but also themselves before it is too late. Inaction is giving in to destruction, and insufficient action is basically fruitless. Drastic action needs to be taken now to prevent the further rising of the oceans and save countless lives.